Welcome to the Wow Factor Radio, Hoofbeat Horse News You Can Use. Sponsored by the Equestrian Theater and Performance Art Association. Show up and ride, www.equestriantheater.com. And by Optimum Mind Management Technologies. Change your thinking and change your life at ommtech.com. That's omtech.com. I am your host, Chris Garrett, and my guest this evening is Renaissance horseman Jean-Philippe Giacomini, better known as J.P. Good evening, J.P.
Good evening. I didn't know it was a real person talking there.
It's really me.
It's really you.
Thank you so much for joining me. I am just thrilled to have someone of your background and stature on my show. Very, very honored that you would take the time to meet with us this evening. And I know our listeners are excited as well to be able to talk to you.
Flattery will get you everywhere.
Well, I'll work on that. Now, JP, I know you're originally from France, and then you went to Portugal. Now, were you involved with horses in France, or did that all happen in Portugal?
No. I started riding in France when I was 8 years old. My parents built a house next door to an equestrian center who had at some point 120 horses.
Oh, my goodness.
And so when I was in high school, I used to pretend to go to bed at 10 o'clock at night, jump through the window. We lived on the first floor. Go and ride a couple of horses, go back to bed. And I did the same in the morning, and then I would be in bed with my clothes on. My mother would wake me up to go to school, and I was pretending to wake up, and then I slept in school all day.
Oh, my.
So that's how that started.
Uh-huh.
And we had, in France, in the 50s and 60s, most of the professional horse people were former cavalry.
Ah, yes, that would make sense.
Because
did you learn?
Yeah.
Did you learn from cavalry people?
I learned from a cavalry captain that was captain in one of the last regiment of Spies. The Spies were the North African light cavalry who had bob horses.
Oh, my.
And so in the 50s and 60s, when they closed down this regiment, the army could not sell their horses, so they leased them for life to equestrian clubs who were naturally run by former officers, so they trusted them and they knew them.
Yes.
And the man I learned with had at all time 30 to 40 of those bob horses, regiment horses, that he had known in the military life, and then they came to him, and they became the lesson horses.
Now, I know very little about French military, but I would imagine that those horses, being in France, were trained in the French classical way?
Not really.
No?
They were ridden by the Algerian and Moroccan cavalrymen, and they had a fairly severe bit. They were not. They could function in formation, but they were not really all that trained.
Oh, I see.
But they were very handy horses, and it's very funny when people talk to me about bob horses. I've known a lot of them, and they didn't look like what people call bobs today.
Yeah.
But he also had a lot of horses from the slaughterhouse. Every Monday he would go and pick horses at the slaughterhouse and save them from their fate. So we had horses that came from Canada. There were Canadian remount and Canadian western horses. I mean western as in of the west of the Canada. We had horses from Poland. I rode a lot of Appaloosas from Poland.
Oh, my, I had no idea.
And then we also rode a lot of reformed racehorses that were both thoroughbreds and standardbreds. And the standardbreds in France are a little bit different from the American standardbreds. First, they only trot, they don't pace. And they're bigger horses, and we have ridden races for standardbreds.
Uh-huh.
And in fact, my first dressage horse was the first horse I owned was a standardbred I picked for $300 off the track.
Oh, really?
That was,
so tell me, when
that
did
was the first one I owned.
When did you decide to make horses your career? How did that happen?
Well, I got my first job when I was 16.
Mm-hmm.
I got a summer job taking care of a stable that was owned by the father of a friend of mine. He had racehorses, and he would retire his own racehorses as trail horses.
Mm-hmm.
And so he had this barn with 15 horses that were not very suitable for trail riding and, amateurs coming off the street to ride them. But fortunately, he had very few clients. So I spent the day riding all of those horses and trying my hand at training them. That was my first actually paid job.
Mm-hmm.
And then I kept riding through high school and college. And eventually, after 2 years of college, I dropped out and decided this is really I wanted to do with horses. And I had been to Portugal in 1966 the first time to visit Master Oliveira when I was 16. And in 1970 I returned there and to live.
So tell us more about Master Oliveira. I know a lot of people have heard of him, but I know there are going to be some of our listeners who have not. Can you give a little bit of background there?
Yes, Nuno Oliveira was a Portuguese master. Died about 15 years ago now, maybe a little more. And he was very well known in his country, but not all that respected. There was nobody's prophet in their own country.
Yes,
that would always work. So he had a group of very dedicated riders who were the Portuguese high society for the most part. But the country could have made a bigger use of him. But he got discovered by foreign riders in the 60s, actually, early 60s. French people went there and they hooed and hawed and thought it was absolutely wonderful. And they started to have magazine articles written, and he got invited to go and give presentations all kind of places.
Mm-hmm.
And foreign riders started to go there in numbers, and I met Mr. Henriquet, was one of his earliest French students when I was 15, and by the time I was 16, I managed to convince my father to take me on holiday there, so we went together. Mm-hmm. And I spent a month the first time, and stayed there, rode the lesson horses every day, and then when I came back, I trained my first horse, kind of, sort of.
Mm-hmm.
That was the standard bred, and then I trained a thoroughbred off the track also. They ended up doing some sort of a Grand Prix, but she was very obliging. She was very tolerant of my mistakes and very generous.
Oh,
so that really helped.
Yeah, those are the horses that we remember all our lives, huh?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I have fond memories of thoroughbreds because that's all we could afford, really.
Mhm. Yeah, from the track.
Right. And so anyway, so Nuno, when I went there, it was a very interesting regime because he started to ride every day at 5:15 every morning, except Sundays where he started at 7.
Mhm.
Because he had an easy day. And he rode probably 6 horses first, and then gave his foreign students a lesson, and then he rode the horses he owned in the afternoon, and gave more lessons in the afternoon, and gave a big group lesson in the evening. So when I went there, I would go to the arena every morning at 5:15. And I watched him ride.
He kept you busy.
What's that?
And he kept you busy, it sounds like.
Right. And I watched, and I didn't have a clue what he was doing.
Mm-hmm.
It was fairly invisible. And he didn't explain anything, but I kept watching, and finally, little by little, I kind of got it, Mm-hmm. And then the best thing that ever happened was that at some point he bought 5 young horses at the time I was there that were straight from the field, and he needed a body to get the horses started. And somehow I ended up with that job.
Ah.
So I had 5 private lessons every day for about 5 to 6 weeks, riding those 5 horses. And this was the most valuable time I've had, because everybody used to focus on riding the advanced movement, the piaffe and the passage and the changes and all that. But really, without the foundation of how the horses were taught to go forward at their first stages of training, there was a big disconnect. And that's why a lot of people who went to ride trained horses, they learned the movements, they learned the technique of how to get the movement, but they did not learn the process of training them to that.
And that is your claim to fame, isn't it? That's what you do.
Well, I try to do it. It doesn't always work, but
well, I think you've done a pretty good job.
So I was very lucky in participating in the step 1 of the process, and have that slammed into me with a sledgehammer every day for 5 hours. And those lessons I never forgot. So I stayed there for a year, watched him train a number of his horses, so I could see the progress of the horses, how he was tackling the problems and dealing with them, because I saw those horses every day being trained. And I could see from one day to the next if they were doing progress, if they were regressing, or how he was going about stuff. And then he told me a little bit more. Eventually, I can't say I was a confidant, but I was a willing ear to listen to anything he had to say. Yeah. And I did that for a year. Then I ran out of money to pay for the lessons, and I got a job as an assistant trainer at the National Stud of Altair. For people who know Lusitanos, they may have heard of Altair Real horses. You ever heard of that name?
I had a Altair Real horse once. Yes.
Right. Okay, and so the Altair Real were bred in a place called Altair du Champ. They are now the horses. They are now exclusively the horses of the Portuguese School of Equestrian Art. The bay horses. Excuse me. And so I went there and I stayed there for 4 years. And I rode about 14 horses every day.
Oh my goodness.
We rode the young horses. We had a system that there was about 30 male horses every year and 30 females that were started. So the mares were started just enough to be tested, and then they were put to breeding. So they were bred generally at 4 years old, and they were ridden in a year of 3 for a short time, 2 or 3 months, and figure out, if anybody was crazy or inept or whatever. And then all the males were also started by the grooms. And so I had the job to assist the chief rider in conducting the starting of those young horses. And I rode 3 or 4 myself every day. And then they were selected, and we kept 4 horses to stay for the age of 4, then be trained 1 more year, and then 2 horses for the age of 5, and then 1 or 2 stayed until 6 and stayed forever. The rest were sold at auction.
Oh, okay.
And so there was this elimination process, because it was a stud farm, of trying to keep which were the best for the program. And
That's a
so
really
I
good
had,
idea. Yeah.
and then my main job was that all the horses that were trained, there was about 15 stallions that were in service as studs, that were of the age of 6 till 20.
Mm-hmm.
There was nobody there to exercise them, so I got to ride them. And they had been trained until the age of 6 by Don José Ataïde, which was the main rider. Some had been trained by Dr. Borba when he was in service there. I think one was trained by Master Oliveira's son when he was there. So they had been trained, and then nothing was done with them because there was nobody to ride them until I showed up.
Ah.
And I showed up because the guy who had the job before me went to the military service, and he ended up in Africa for 4 years during the colonial wars of Portugal.
Mm-hmm.
And then he came back after I left.
So where did you go from there?
That happened. After there, I was given the job of managing the Lisbon Country Club.
Ah.
And somebody built this. This was the second country club in Lisbon built. He had but on an American model. He had a big golf course and a tennis club and a private beach and all that. And they built an equestrian center. And I built a derby course, like Hicks did.
Mm-hmm.
And we built a lot of cross-country courses, and I started to organize eventing, which there was very little of at the time in Portugal. And in fact, Mr. Andrade, Fernando Andrade, was well known as the breeder of the Andrade horses, was president of the federation at the time, and he asked me to train the juniors, the Portuguese junior team, and we did a lot of shows and organizing of events. And I have old pictures of João-Philippe Graciosa, who is the current director of the Portuguese school, coming to do an exhibition at the first event I organized there. He was 17 or 18 at the time, and he had been my fellow student at Oliveira's for the time I was there, and we kind of always followed each other. He went to Spain after that, and so did I, and so forth. There was a group of that generation, my generation, there was a group of 3 or 4 guys that were either students of Oliveira, of Ataïde, or of Dr. Borba, was the first director of the Portuguese school. And we all ended up in the same places.
Did the Portuguese school survive 74 revolution?
No, the Portuguese school was created in 79.
Oh, in 79. Okay. So tell us about 74. You were in Portugal at that time, weren't you?
Oh, yes. We had a little revolution.
So tell us about that. What did you do?
Well, it was funny because the revolution happened the 25th of April, 74, that everybody was there remembers. And I had an event the 26th. And all of my riders, which were mostly military, Republican Guard, cavalry school, etc., all ended up in jail.
Oh, no.
Because the communists took over, and all the cavalry regiments were considered rightists. So they didn't wait to have any trouble. They put all those guys in jail, and they ruined my show. I didn't have anybody to come and ride.
Oh, my.
And then shortly after that, the workers took over the place and expulsed the owners, and I lost my job and so on.
Oh, dear.
And we survived in Lisbon for a while. We all went back to the jockey club in Lisbon, where it was a big equestrian center, but it became very, very difficult after a while. There was a lot of unrest and dangerous situations. And I ended up being invited to go and compete in Jerez, in Spain, at the Jerez de la Frontera, where they have the Andalusian school.
Yeah.
What happened at that time is that Mr. Domecq, that some of the people here would know, Alvaro Domecq, had started the school as a private school out of his own pocket with his own horses. and with a lot of Lusitanos that he bought in Portugal, in part thanks to the revolution, because horses were selling cheap. You know, you have a revolution at home, you want to sell your horses and get some money out if you could. So all the Portuguese were trying to sell their horses in Spain and get paid in Spain to have money outside, because you couldn't export any capital or anything, right? And so Domecq bought quite a few horses like that, and then he hired my best friend, who was a student of Dr. Borba, to go over there as a professor, and Dr. Borba was also a professor there, and they arranged for me to be invited to go and ride a dressage show in Jerez during the fair. So I got a temporary permit to take all of my horses out, and naturally I never went back.
Yeah.
And one of them was Novio, was a 3-year-old at the time, who became a very famous horse later, and I went to Jerez, participated in the dressage show, and I had the good luck to win all my classes. So I got a job to run some sort of a country club in an hotel in Marbella. And I stayed there for a year. We organized dressage shows there. In fact, the riders of the Spanish school, of the Andalusian Real Escuela, that we all know now, who have been medalists in Athens and so forth, all of those riders rode in their first dressage show at my show in Marbella in 75. That was before the time of Rafael Soto and so forth, but all the original group of riders had never done a dressage show in their life. And we created this show. I found a dressage judge from Sweden that was on holiday, and a Spanish guy and a Portuguese guy. We had a free judge jury, and we got them broken.
Oh my goodness!
And so that's how it happened.
And so you were able to go back to Portugal after things calmed down later then?
No, right? I visited, but I did not go down. I mean, the things did not calm down until really 78. And in Spain, Franco had died. The dictator Franco had died in 75.
Yeah. And
it looked like they were aiming for civil war. So I was not too eager to stay. It turned out that King Juan Carlos saved the day and nothing happened, but I'd seen one revolution, that was enough. So I wasn't waiting for another one. So I took my horses and I went to France. And while I was in France for a short time, I met some English riders who invited me to go and give clinics. And in fact, it was a funny thing that there was a international show in Paris at the Polo Club, and I used to go teach there. And this English lady had this horse that could do the Grand Prix, except he had a miserable piaffe. So she was very frustrated that she could not take part in the Grand Prix because the selectors thought that she was too embarrassing with the bad piaffe he had. There was nothing to be embarrassed. There's plenty of other bad piaffe at the time, but she was desperate for anybody to help her with the piaffe. So I got to talk with her, and the Sunday after the show, I rode the horse and I got him to piaffe, and that 10 minutes I spent on the horse got me to make a career in England, thanks to that. And the day I was riding the horse, the only other rider in the arena in Paris was Dr. Klimke, who was schooling his wife's horse. He was, at his first show was Alarish, which is the horse he won a gold medal in 84 with. And he was riding in one end of the arena, I was riding the other end, and I was wearing a three-piece suit because I was dressed to go to that show, and we used to be formal. You know, now you go to shows in sneakers, but I would never go and give a riding lesson without a tie and hiking jacket. You know, that was just the way, right? And so he noticed that I was riding in a suit. And in 84, 6 years later, I met him in Los Angeles. And we got chatting. He said, "Oh, you are the man with the suit."
So that's what you remembered by not your horse, but your suit.
You remember there was a guy riding the horse in a suit.
Yeah.
So anyway, and then I end up in England, and I end up training a few dressage horses, top international horses, but I mostly train event horses.
Mhm.
I love eventing, and I did quite a bit myself. I mean, not at a very serious level as a competitor, but as a coach, I took on a rider called Rachel Bayliss, who went on to the British team the following year and won 4 golds, 1 silver medal. She was European champion. She won the Olympics.
Oh my goodness.
She won in the World Championship. She did very well.
Mm-hmm.
And she did that with 2 horses, and one of them had the distinction to be both a dressage horse and an event horse at the same time internationally. So he was on both British teams.
Oh my goodness!
I don't think any other horse has done that since. I mean, now it would be very difficult.
So you've coached riders from all over the world, haven't you? Not just British, but.
Well, when I was in England, we had a big stable of event horses. So I had people from Canada and Ireland and some U.S. riders.
Now, did you take Novio there with you?
Yes, Novio
from Portugal.
Novio came with me. Novio had an accident as a 3-year-old, and he was basically unrideable until he had surgery. By the time I took him to France. And I took him to England, trained him there. I trained him as my dressage horse. He ended up doing a decent Grand Prix. And then I was so busy coaching that I didn't have time to compete him. So we tried him out eventing. Rachel rode him eventing. He was okay, but he was such a good jumper that I decided to send him show jumping. Mm-hmm. And a couple of riders tried him, and then John Whittaker, who was the leading British rider to this day, actually, rode him and got along with him extremely well. He won a class the first day I delivered the horse to him.
Oh my.
And 2 years later, he was the leading money earner in England as a show jumper.
You know, most people don't realize that baroque horses do jump. They can jump.
Now, well, they can. They can. Not many can jump like that, though.
Yeah, he was an unusual fellow.
He was an unusual horse, and he was very good, and he was very good whatever we put him to. And then when we retired him, I sold him back to Portugal. He very nearly went to Germany as a stallion. Mm-hmm. He would have been the first Lusitano to be inscribed in the Oldenburg stud book. There was a leading breeder at the time that wanted to do that, but the rest of the stud book committee did not agree, so they didn't buy him, which is just as well. And he went to Portugal, and he was champion sire of Get for like 7 years, and he's one of the most important stallions in the stud book now.
Wow, he probably has a lot of progeny by now.
Yeah, he's got a lot of progeny, and he has had very good jumpers in England. He's had very good dressage horses and driving horses and bullfighting horses. He produced all across the board.
Now, I know a lot of our listeners are familiar with your Chimunde project, your TM project. But for those who haven't heard about that, let's move up closer to today. How did you get involved in that, and where is that headed?
Well, what happened was that we were a little bit ahead of our time. What happened is that in '92, I was in Portugal. In fact, I got hired by the president of the Lusitano Association of the time to help him with some of his horses. And I did that over several years. And he said to me, we need a competition for the Lusitanos that will be a way to select the horses as well as promote them. Can you design something? You know, you've seen other countries and so forth, and so I went home and I put pen to paper, and I developed basically two classes. One for what I would call Baroque dressage, for lack of a better word, which was a dressage competition that's suitable for the Baroque type horses in the small arena, the 20 by 40 arena, and with all the movement compressed to suit the gaits of our horses, and a progression that correspond to their natural training progression. And then the second one was a versatility class that is now known as working equitation.
Ah.
That's how that happened.
Tell us about that. What exactly is working equitation?
Well, let me go back one step. So I designed the two, and then I went back to Portugal and I said, here it is. But as I could see I had the vision of this becoming a much bigger thing. I said, if you make this a breed thing, this is always going to be limited to the breed. You have to open it to absolutely everybody, so your breed can benefit, but we'll have a lot of people in it. Just the same way that dressage is open to all breeds, even though we all know that some breeds will dominate, right?
Right.
And we had a little disagreement on the way to proceed there. And to my surprise, the format of we had a show in Portugal. I had a show in Portugal that was televised by national television and so on. We still have tapes of that. Of the first both dressage and the versatility. Was also being judged as a combined test, the two together.
Right.
And to my surprise, the next year, the classes reappeared as working equitation. There was a movement to create a competition for cow horses, basically, in France, Italy, Spain, and Portugal, the four countries who have cowboys in Europe. And they were looking for a format, and everybody had this idea, but, from between an idea and actually having a judgeable competition, that's very different. And the Portuguese said, we just have this thing that this friend of ours did, blah, blah. And sure enough, they end up with that. So I put a smile on it and let them use it because that was the best way to deal with the situation. But the format of the versatility format of the maniability classes and so forth of working equitation today up to the World Championship is exactly the same format that we designed in '92.
Tell us about that format, would you? Can you give us a brief description for people who aren't familiar?
The whole idea of the versatility is that you want to select horses that are as fast as a gymkhana horse, but as quiet and respectful as a trail horse. So the entire format is an alternance of fast things and slow things. Like, for instance, we have them go around bending poles, but just after the bending poles, they have to open and close a gate. So your typical bending pole horse could not do that because you can't stop them.
Right.
They're too crazy, right? The same way, the trail horses who do all the Western Trail type obstacles are so slow they couldn't run barrels. But we have the versatility horses go over a pole sideways, for instance, just like in the trail class.
Yes.
But immediately after, they go and run a barrel, pick a lance, knock a ball from between the horns of a plastic bull, or catch a ring, or et cetera. So it's a mixture of skill, control, and speed, and they do it in two different classes. They have a style class, and then they have a speed class. I only believe in the speed class because the style class is a nightmare to judge. And I really think that if you create a competition, you have to think about what the judges are going to do. How simple it has to be done. So I'm reactivating this class now, and we're looking for people interested in organizing it. in their own backyard. It has to be judged like a show jumping class. You jump, you get a point. You don't jump, you get 0, or something.
And then
something simple. Very, very simple way of doing it.
Yeah,
and then you have a clock, and that's very simple, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So for
people who are interested in this, how can they get a hold of you? Can you have a website people can find the
Well, we don't have a website with that, but they can email me. I think you have got my email on the. You got my email on the on the call, right?
Mhm. Yeah, it's tmonday@bellsouth.net.
Right.
Yeah.
Now something very interesting just happened about Trofeo Mundi. Actually, the last 2 weeks, is that 2 years ago they created an association in Spain called Alta Escuela Española, high school Spanish style, right? And they asked Mr. Domecq to be president. And I've had several discussions with him. In fact, I published an article in a Spanish magazine 10 years ago saying that they needed that competition to help market the horses, because breed of horses must have a purpose. You wouldn't have thoroughbreds if you didn't have racing.
Right.
Racing is what justifies thoroughbreds and vice versa, right? And you wouldn't have Holsteiners if you didn't have show jumping and so forth. So if you want to have Spanish and Portuguese horses, you need to have a Baroque dressage competition or Versatile class or bullfighting. You need to have those things that works for them. And anyway, slowly but surely, they got to this situation that they created the association, and they've got a couple hundred riders, and they start to get it going. And I get this call from Spain 2 weeks ago saying, well, we've got this little problem, is that we need to have classes, we need to have tests. And we know you have the test. I've heard that story before, right? We know you have the test. Will you lend us the test to be able to get something started? Because it is not, when people start to think about writing a test, it is not easy to do. When you think about the USEF dressage classes, for instance, or the FEI dressage classes, they have committees doing this, and there's a history, the FEI classes, there's a history of 100 years of test writing that slowly evolved, right? And some tests have been a complete disaster, and some have been better, and they refine them all the time to make sure they work for everybody. And we spent a number of years, friends of mine were very educated people, putting a series of tests together from the most beginning level to the Grand Prix level that work, and a judging system that permits us to judge the quality of the horsemanship as well as the quality of the test performance. So that system is sitting there, and the Spanish decided it was easier to ask me if they could get it licensed from me rather than try to reinvent the wheel, which was a little more complicated than they thought, because they've been wrestling with that for 2 years without much success. So this just happened, and I know they were having a meeting this week, in fact yesterday or the day before, about how to do the next step, and very likely I'm going to go to Spain, organize some clinics to get that ball rolling, and eventually we're going to get there,
Yeah.
In 92, I was a bit early.
Yeah. You're 15 years too early.
I was 15 years too early, because there was nobody. Do you imagine that it was inconceivable in 92-93 that the focus of the Andalusian Lusitano would be dressage in high school?
Yeah,
nobody wanted to hear about it.
Yeah.
And when I started to push that, there was a huge resistance, because at that time the whole focus of ILHA was saddle seat, Western, and hunters. Mostly saddle seat and Western. And I said, this is not what this horse is known for. This is not what the horse is best at. You can do those things. There's nothing wrong with doing them, but you can't do them as the primary focus. You know, it's like if you say you take thoroughbreds to go driving. Well, sure enough, you can drive thoroughbreds. I mean, they will drive just as much as the next horse, right? But thoroughbreds are defined by racing. If you don't have racing, it doesn't make sense.
You breed Lusitanos in Kentucky, is that correct?
I actually breed Luso-Spanish horses.
Yes, what's known as SPs, yeah.
Which is known as SPs. I have the greatest faith in the cross between the two, and when I met my wife Shelley, she had an Andalusian breeding farm.
Mhm.
And she kept one mare that was the best of the bunch, and that mare has been bred to my Lusitano Steins, which I imported later, and she's now expecting I think 8th baby, and she's had 6 girls and 1 boy. So now we've got a whole herd of brood mares who are all SP 50-50.
Mhm.
And it's very interesting because those horses are, in my opinion, superior to both parents.
Really? So you are
absolutely
proponent to the SP, which in this country is a purebred. Yeah, purebred Andalusian. Yeah. So your farm.
I think it's the best. I think it's really the best of both worlds.
Mhm.
Because there's this endless discussion about are they the same, are they different? Well, they're the same in the sense that all quarter horses are the same, but all quarter horses are different. If you look at a cutting horse and a halter horse, it's not the same thing.
Right.
Even though it comes out of the same genetic package, right? And so what happened is that in Spain and Portugal, people have selected horses through the traits that each person was most interested in. And when I say each person, each family, because the Andrade is a family, the Vega is a family, the Terrys were a family of people, and generation after generation, they usually follow the style set up by their grandfathers or great-grandfathers, and to breed the same thing with some evolution.
I like how you compare that to a quarter horse that might be bred for cutting as opposed to halter. It is still the same breed, just a different focus based on taste and what they're going to be used for.
And taste and purpose and fashion and market and all of those things, right?
Yeah.
And so each family, so Portugal had 4 families really that were somewhat different from each other. Spain had 2 families mostly that are somewhat different of each other. And each of those families have been breeding for homozygous traits of a certain kind. So when you cross them, what happened is you have an addition of the homozygous traits. You follow what I'm saying?
Yes.
It's like if you breed a poodle to a Labrador, right? You're going to have a dog with both a poodle and a Labrador. It does both things. It will do tricks and retrieve.
So you hope you get
there's no competition between the. What's that?
So you hope you get the best of both.
Well, if you're breeding animals who have been highly inbred themselves and are very homozygous in their qualities, you will get an addition of traits, not a choice.
So then those traits will be dominant even though you cross them to something else, is what you're saying, right?
Right. And so, for instance, if you take the Andalusian traits, that the Andalusians have been bred to be extremely gentle for the majority, right? That gentility, that nobility passes on, even if you breed them to something a little bit more difficult. The Vega horses have been bred for the canter, for instance. That canter always passes on.
Which is why they're so valued as bullfighting horses. Is that right?
This is why they're valued as a bullfighting horse. And the Terry horses, the Andalusian, have been bred for the trot. So when you make a
higher
cross, you end up with a horse that can trot better and canter better.
Ah.
As opposed
Well,
to an
that makes
Andalusian that trots well but doesn't canter so well, and a Lusitano that canters well but may not trot as pretty as the other one.
Mm-hmm.
So your SP has got a much bigger shot at being both a walk, trot, canter horse
mm-hmm.
than one on each side. And then when you are creating a program, for instance, I bred twice my Bocado mare, Bocado Terry, right, to the
mm-hmm.
same stallion with a very good physique, but it was a little bit more difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the daughters came out with the mind of the mother and the body of the father.
Uh-huh.
Which is exactly what we wanted.
What you wanted.
The other daughter was a little bit less so. She was more in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
She looked a little bit more like her mother, and she behaved a little bit more like her father. So she's not a disaster, but the one I want is the one that is got the very strong trait of the mother and the very strong trait of the father.
Now, when you do these evaluations of horses, you're looking for very specific things for specific work, I understand. And you do this for other people, don't you? Will evaluate their horses?
Say that again?
When you evaluate horses for breeding or
right,
you look for very specific things depending on what it is you want that horse to do. I know for you, you're looking for an overall. It sounds like something.
You know, we have a breed standard.
Uh-huh.
I mean, the breed standard has been written by some very good people, both from Spain and Portugal. They were written by, in fact, Mr. Andrade's father was instrumental in writing the Spanish breed standard along with other Spanish breeders, and his son was instrumental in writing the Portuguese breed standard. And they are 90% the same. So I just put together a breed standard for the SP horse that really keep all aspects, keep the same focus, both the focus of the Spanish and the Portuguese together. Uh-huh. And if you breed a horse with a breed standard, the horse will be an all-around horse, will be a perfect riding horse, which is what we're trying to breed. We're trying to breed a horse who's not a specialist.
Right, right. If someone has a horse that they want to have evaluated, is that something you can do?
Well, actually, to let you into a little secret, it's not going to be a secret for very long. Because nobody has, we have revision here for Spanish horses and Portuguese horses, which is a very superficial and administrative and political event, as memory will tell us, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
I decided to put together something to promote the Luso-Spanish horse, which is going to be released soon under the name of the Ibero Horse Society.
Mm.
And because
Say
I was
that
looking
again.
for
What are you calling it?
Ibero Horse Society, because I wanted to give an identity to the SP horse, which has been the poor cousin of everybody's business. And in fact, it's really too bad because it can be a very good horse, and we have a situation in the U.S. where now we have enough Lusitano stallions and plenty of Spanish mares that can be bred together. But people need a blueprint to do that, and they need an evaluation system. So we'll put together an evaluation system that can be done on video, so you don't have to haul your horse 500 miles across country. And we will soon have available a system that you send me a video, we will examine the horse and give it a score, and that score will not be a condition of inscription, will just be a piece of education.
Oh, okay. Something they can show a prospective buyer or breeder.
Right. You can, and mostly you need to have, you cannot breed if you don't have somebody else giving you an opinion about your own horses. I mean, nobody in Spain and Portugal do this thing blind without advisors. When I visit a Spanish farm or a Portuguese farm, the breeder usually has the trust to ask me an opinion. That doesn't mean he's going to follow it, but he wants to know. You know, he wants to know what I think. He wants to know what his rider thinks. So he needs to know what a colleague breeder thinks, right?
Right.
Because horse breeding induces blindness. You know that?
Oh, I do. I've bred my own.
You think that everybody thinks the horse is perfect. And you have to be honest. You have got to look at your own horse and say, is this really what I want to breed for? You know?
Yeah.
I mean, if this was somebody else's horse, would I buy it?
Right. If somebody wants to get a hold of you to have their horse evaluated by video, they can reach you at the
They can send us an email, and we're preparing the website right now to have all of that stuff online. I was working on it today. It's going to be a few weeks till we're ready, but it's getting there, and the forms are getting prepared and so on. So if anybody has the interest, and particularly with the SP horse, and I want to make the point that this is not in any way to replace any existing stud book, because we're not planning to become the legitimacy of the breed in any way. In fact, we will use the ILHA papers or the Spanish papers or the Lusitano papers to register the horses with.
So will you have this on your BaroqueFarmsUSA.com?
No, I don't
site?
have. It's going to be a different. It's going to be a different website.
Different site.
Yeah.
Okay, and for our listeners, if you would like more information about this, you can reach JP at tmundy@bellsouth.net. And that's T as in Tom, M as in Mary, UNDI at bellsouth.net. Or you can always reach us at info@thewowfactorradio.com, and we will forward your questions to our guest this evening. JP, we have a number of questions from our listening audience. Is it all right if we go ahead and go into that?
Sure. Let me just add one thing here.
Okay.
We have so much stuff going on that we decided to put together a newsletter, and the newsletter is being prepared now. Will be a monthly newsletter. In fact, with your permission, I'm going to put this interview on it. And it's going to have a piece of video every month and a couple of articles and so on. But if anybody is interested in receiving the newsletter, which is free, just send us an email, and we'll put you on the list, so you'll be the first one to get it.
Okay,
so, of course, what question do you have?
Okay, I have a question from Philip in San Angelo, Texas. He says, won't adding competition to the Baroque dressage cause loss of purity of movement?
Okay, you need to repeat that to me.
Okay, won't adding competition to Baroque dressage cause a loss of purity of movement? As someone who doesn't like the idea of competition.
He doesn't like the idea of competition, is that what you're saying?
Right. Not you, him.
Okay. Well, I don't know that I can do that at all. First of all, to define the purity of movement, you have somebody to judge it.
That makes sense, yeah.
You know, you've got to say, what is the purity of movement? And the purity of movement is a horse that can do a decent walk, trot, canter in all the exercises of the Baroque gymnasium. I mean, there's a catalog of movements, you know. I mean, a catalog for lack of better words, right? There's a gymnastic progression. It's the straight line, the circle, the corner, the shoulder in, the half pass, etc., the pirouette, and so forth, right?
And I think, go ahead.
Yeah, and so the quality of movement is a horse that can do all of those movements in cadence, in symmetry, elegantly, in balance. That's what defines the purity of the movement. And so
how would competition interfere with that? I know there has been some concern in the competitive dressage circles that horses have become specialists in each gait as opposed to a flow of all the gaits. And I'm guessing that's what this gentleman's concern is.
No, I think the problem is a little bit different. Okay. Dressage competition today is based on the model of warm blood horses.
Right.
Okay. So because of that, you're asking every other breed to move like a warm blood, and most breeds do not have the strength to move in that slow cadence and that big amplitude.
Mm-hmm.
They just can't do it. So that kind of regular dressage will improve the gaits to a certain point, but when people start to select for gaits who are like warm bloods, then they're going to lose the purity of the Baroque movement.
Mm-hmm.
I consider that horses have to move like Baroque horses. We don't want to move them to move any differently than they always have moved, except only better.
So really,
right?
Your competition would actually save that purity of movement rather than trying to make a Baroque horse into a warm blood.
Exactly, and the number one thing that makes that happen is the size of the arena. See, Baroque horses were used in small arenas. I mean, the Spanish riding school arena is 17 meter or less wide, right? It's long and narrow, right? And they have 12 horses functioning in that, as opposed to a 20 by 60 with one horse in it.
Hmm.
Oliveira's arena was 12 meters by 24, and we worked 10 horses
at a time. Holy cow!
12 meters by 24. That is very small, right?
That is.
So in order to have a horse, in order to have a horse move in that, it needs to have a degree of agility, and it needs to have short gaits.
Right. Yeah.
Those gaits are the definition of the breed. So if you put the arena back to their size, then you're not going to change the horse. You're just going to improve it by having to perform all the gymnastics.
Right.
Does that answer your question?
Well, I think so. Philip, if that didn't, send us another question. I do have Joyce in Pueblo, Colorado, wants to know if your endo sticks are still available. That isn't something we talked about, and I know you've developed
a number.
We
didn't talk about it. I am lazy at making them is the only question.
Oh, okay. Well, we may have to do a whole program just on that. I know.
Right, we can do a program on that.
Yeah, we'll have to do that. So, Joyce, you have JP's email, so you can send him an email and ask him when he's going to make more.
Okay, I promise I will.
All right, you have a request. All right, Josie in Denver wants to know, will you be teaching clinics in the Denver area soon? And I think she just missed one. Weren't you just in the Denver area?
I was in Denver in, what month was I in there? January, I think.
January, yeah, I think it was. Yeah.
Just during, when is the stock show? January.
January, yes.
Yeah, I was there in January. Well, actually, there's a lady in Colorado called Barbara Wright.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Do you know Barbara Wright?
Yeah, Harmony Horseworks, yes.
Harmony Horseworks, right.
And equestrian theater, yeah.
Exactly. And I've started to work with her on the little gadget she put together. I was very interested in that, this relaxation gadget.
Mm-hmm.
The pulsar, she calls it.
Mm-hmm.
And she came to a clinic I did in New Mexico a couple of weeks ago, or maybe 3 weeks ago. And she asked me if I would go and do a clinic in Colorado. I'm going to do a clinic in New Mexico in Watrous. For who knows, you know where that is?
I don't.
Watrous is north of Las Vegas, New Mexico.
Okay.
So it's not that far from Colorado.
No, it's very close, actually. Do you have this information on your website? On the
I don't, but it's going to be the 2nd of May.
Okay, 2nd of May in New Mexico.
2nd of May, New Mexico.
So, Josie,
and if people are interested in doing a clinic in Colorado, in Denver, it's just a matter of calling me and putting this together, and we can talk to Barbara if she wants to be the organizer. I think she lives not too far from Colorado Springs.
Yeah, she's, I think, just up in the hills, in the mountains here.
Right.
Yeah, she's not far at all, yeah. Okay, well, we have Mary in San Luis Obispo wanting to know, is there a difference between Portuguese riding and Spanish riding?
No, there's good riding and there's bad riding.
Good answer.
Okay. Well, I mean, there's different traditions. Portuguese bullfighting, but see, the proper bullfighting style used to be Portuguese. Now the best bullfighter is a Spanish guy who learned in Portugal.
Oh. Yeah, we used to say King Philip of Spain was actually an SP. So
he was, exactly.
His mother was Portuguese. Yeah.
And so the people who ride, well, all end up riding the same way.
You're right. So there's good
but
riding and bad riding.
There's different tradition, different costume, different saddles, but that's fairly superficial.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, we've about run out of time, and I so appreciate you being here with us. We'll have to have you on again because I know we were going to talk quite a bit about training, and we ended up talking about history and your Monday and the TM.
Well, I guess we can do another one. We can do another one sometime soon.
Yeah, let's do that. This has been wonderful. So you're listening to the Wow Factor Radio, and this evening we have J.P. Giacomini. You can reach him at tmundi@bellsouth.net. That's TMUNDI at bellsouth.net. And check out his website at www.baroquefarms, that's plural, USA.com. That's Baroque, BAROQUE, farms, USA.com. And we'll have you back again very soon. JP, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you indeed.
And you have a good evening. Good night, everyone.
You too. Bye-bye.